Okay, so we are getting into the first fun service of AWS, which is Amazon EC2. So when you start with AWS, you kind of want to start over there because that's kind of the basis of AWS. That's how Amazon used to work for a very long time. Now it's no more serverless, as we'll see in this course as well, but EC2, you have to start there. So it's one of the most popular of AWS services, and basically it consists of the capability of launching virtual machines in the cloud, okay, but also storing data on virtual drives, that's called EBS, distributing load across machines, that's called ELB or load balancing, and scaling servers using an auto-scaling group or ASG. So it encompasses a lot of different services. Knowing EC2 for me, it's fundamental to understanding how the cloud works. This is where the revolution started. It's the ability to just start a machine right away. And we need to start there to understand how serverless later on makes a difference. So in this first hands-on, I want to launch an EC2 instance running Linux. And so we'll be launching our first server and we'll use the AWS console. And this will give us a high-level overview of the various parameters that we'll have in this course and for the EC2 launching. But we will go over them one by one in much greater details in the next lecture. We'll learn how to start, stop, and terminate our instances. Okay, that's super important, just to get a feeling of how things work. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so I am in my AWS console, and although EC2 link is right here, I want you to get used to writing EC2 in the search bar and just getting the first link. So first, make sure that you are in the region that's close to you, okay? For me, it's EU Paris, but based on where you are in the world, please choose the region that makes the most sense for you to use EC2 in. So we are in the EC2 console, and as you can see, pretty much nothing's happening. We have 0 running instances, a bunch of things in one security group. So basically, this is the basis of things, but the first thing we want to do is to launch an instance. So there's this big blue button right here to launch an instance. Now, when I click on it, the first thing I land on is choosing an AMI. So AMI stands for Amazon Machine Image. And this is basically the software and the operating system that will be launched on that server. Now, there is a bunch of distributions that you may recognize, such as Ubuntu or Red Hat or Microsoft Windows, etc., etc. In this course, it's for the certification. It's much better if we go using the Amazon Linux AMI because they come with a lot of Amazon-specific stuff. Especially recently, Amazon Linux 2 came out, and to me, it's kind of what you have to use today, because it's how Amazon sees you using Linux. And so we'll use Amazon Linux 2. And the thing is, I'm telling you this because if you use Amazon Linux for this tutorial, the commands are going to be slightly different. And because I want you to use the exact same setup as me, the exact same tooling, I would like you to choose Amazon Linux 2. Now, if you notice something on the left-hand side, it says free tier eligible. So yes, we are going to try to remain all the way in the free tier when you start your AWS account. So when you start working with Amazon, they give you a bunch of free stuff to try the services, such as we're doing right now. And it's much better for me and for you if we manage to remain free. So we'll choose something that is free tier eligible. We'll choose Amazon Linux 2. We'll select the AMI. And now we have to choose a type of machine we have. So when you select an EC2 machine, you can select the type. And basically the type is saying how powerful do you want your machine to be, how many vCPUs do you want it to have, and how much memory do you want it to have. If you scroll down on this page, you can see there's a lot of different machine types, okay, a lot of them. But only one of them is free tier eligible. So we'll just go for T2 Micro. In the next lecture, we'll learn about the differences and why there are so many names, but for now, let's just go and use T2 Micro. Now I could go ahead and click on review and launch. It's a big blue button and it's quite tempting, but I will just do next configure instance details because I want to show you all the parameters that are available for you. So now we're getting into a lot of parameters and you may be overwhelmed right now, but don't worry, over time, over the lessons and the next lectures and so on, you will become much more familiar with them. Number of instances we want to launch is 1. That sounds about right. I will not request spot instances. We want an on-demand instance, so we'll not take this box. Now the network is around VPC and subnets. Now when you create an AWS account, it comes with something called the default VPC. So we'll just use the default VPC right here. And the subnet is basically saying in which AZ availability zone do you want your instance to be. So I'll say no preference because I have no preference. But as you can see from before, when I talked about AZ, we can see now we have EU West 3A, B, and C, and we could choose to launch our instance in one of these data centers or AZ. Same wise, I will auto-assign a public IP and I will just use the subnet setting. Now we don't need an IAM role. We'll see IAM roles in great depth in the next section. The shutdown behavior is that if I shut down my machine, it will stop, and so on. All of this looks good. All of this are pretty much advanced parameters that we'll see in the later on. Then there's advanced details and something called user data, and I have a lecture dedicated to this. Now I click on storage. Basically, when you start an instance, okay, right now we started with pretty much all the default settings. When you start an instance, it has to have its operating system somewhere, and that's a disk. And basically that's called storage. So storage is EBS volume. And currently we just want the root storage, so that's where our operating system is going to run. And we'll leave it at dev xvda. We'll leave it at 8 GB of space, and we'll leave it as SSD. All of this is very important. And as you can see, when by default, when the instance is terminated, so is the root volume because this is ticked. And I'll leave it like this. Finally, you'll see it's not encrypted. We'll talk about EBS encryption later on. Now, when you launch an instance, we can add tags. And tags are basically key value pairs, which allow you to just identify that instance and classify it. For example, the first tag that's going to be very important is a name tag. And we'll say, my first instance, okay? And you can have it whatever you want. You can add another tag and say, you know, another tag, another key, and then another value. It's whatever you want, okay? You're free to have tags for whatever you want. But the name tag is going to be quite important because it's going to show in the UI. Now, security group-wise, this is basically going to be a firewall around your instance. Okay, and so when we get started with our instance, the first thing we want to do under Linux is make sure we can SSH into it. So there's an SSH rule, and then you can define a port, and you can define a source. Currently, I will go and create a new security group, okay, which in terms of name, I'll just call it my first security group, okay? And the description, I'll say created with my first EC2 instance. And I will allow SSH on port 22. And the source currently, I'll just leave it as 000/0. It's quite bad practice. You could set it as my IP if just you wanted to use that port. But to make things super simple right now and not overload you, we will set it as custom 000/0, which means any IP. Now, description is something new, but you can say SSH to the instance. And if you don't know what SSH is, just wait until the next lecture. Now we'll review and launch it, and we'll get a big warning saying your security group is open to the world. So 000/0 is not best practice. So we get a bit of a little warning here, but that's okay. And here we can review all the parameters that we've had, okay? So everything looks good, okay? Just make sure you have a T2 micro and make sure you use Amazon Linux 2, okay? But everything looks fine. So we'll click on launch. And the last thing we have to do when we click on launch is to create a key pair. Now, basically a key pair is what's going to give you access to log into or to SSH into the machine you just launched. And so right now we have no key pair. So you can import key pairs if you already have key pairs. But for this case, we will go and create a new key pair. And for this key pair, I'll call this EC2 tutorial. The next step is for me to download that key pair, and it downloads a ec2tutorial.pem file, and then I click on launch instances. So that's about right. And then we click on view instances in the bottom right, and we end up with our first instance starting. So as you can see now, our instance is started. We can see the instance type. It's my T2 micro. The availability zone it was launched in. So for me, it's EU West 3C, and the instance state, which is pending. So it's being created. Everything looks good. And we'll see how we deal with the IPs in the next lecture. As we can see, the tag here, my first instance was used under the name column. So basically our instance was being named, which is great. And so we are good to go. Now, one thing I want to show you is that once the instance is started, we have a green running, okay? And green running means that the instance is started and you can be billed. This is a T2 micro, so it's the free tier usage, so you won't be billed for this instance. But basically, if it was another instance, you start getting billed. If you right click on it, you can stop, reboot, or terminate an instance. If you stop it, it will just not bill you for it and the instance will be stopped. If you reboot it, it's what you expect it to be, like your computer, it will reboot it. And if you terminate it, you're basically saying, I want it no more, don't save the data, just take it away from me. And basically you won't be able to access your instance ever again, okay? So this is very, very quick. For now, we'll just keep that instance running because we have to do a tutorial with it. So I will see you in the next lecture to show you how we can access it, SSH into it from either Linux, Mac, or Windows. So see you in the next lecture.